It may actually be a little bit crazy to realize that certain films have pulled their inspiration from the real world, but that's been the case for way more movies than you would imagine. From horror offerings to rom-coms to all-out cheesy action pictures and more. I'm Gareth from Whatculture.com, and here are 10 movies you didn't know were based on real-life people. Number 10, The Hills Have Eyes. The second feature film of the legendary Wes Craven, The Hills Have Eyes stands as a huge fan favorite of many a horror hound to this day. What many of those fans may not realize, though, is that The Hills Have Eyes took inspiration from some very real horrors carried out by Alexander Sawney Bean. Legend has it, Bean was a 16th century Scotsman who took his clan out into the hills, where they led a life of incest, murder, and cannibalism. How lovely. Pulling direct inspiration from this, Craven's 1977 The Hills Have Eyes showcased a murderous tribe of cannibals looking to prey on those passing through the desert. And like the story of Alexander Bean, the iconic Horror Masters movie concluded with the purported victims of the tale being just as vicious and violent as their attackers once the tables were turned. In real life, the Bean clan were tortured, quartered, burned, and hanged by the officials of the day. Oh well, onwards and upwards from here then. Number 9, Top Gun. Many of the exploits seen in 1986's fist-pumping Top Gun were actually based on the life and career of Randy Duke Cunningham, a fighter pilot who went on to become a US Senator. It was Duke's time in Vietnam that served as the inspiration for several key Top Gun scenes. In particular, the hitting the brakes maneuver that Tom Cruise's Maverick pulls is a move taken directly from Cunningham's playbook, with the real-life pilot having utilized that during his time in Nam. In the real world, Cunningham received the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Air Medal on 15 occasions, and the Purple Heart. After that, he became an instructor at the US Navy's Fighter Weapons School, which is also known as, you guessed it, Top Gun. Spectacularly, Randy Duke Cunningham resigned from his senator role in 2005. After pleading guilty to accepting a minimum of $2.4 million in bribes, and for underreporting his taxable income. Sentenced to 8 years and 4 months in prison, Cunningham was released in June 2013, before later being given a conditional pardon by Donald Trump. Number 8, Aftermath. 2017's Aftermath is a picture based on the tragic events of the 1st of July 2002 and the fallout of that. That date saw a cargo jet and passenger jet have a mid-air collision over the German town of Überlingen that killed 71 people. After an investigation, the blame for this incident was placed at the door of the Swiss Air Traffic Controller Service, with the tragedy taking place close to the Swiss border. Nearly 2 years after this crash, Peter Nielsen, the air traffic controller on duty at the time of the crash, was murdered in a revenge attack by Vitaly Kaloyev. Kaloyev had lost his wife and 2 children in the 2002 accident. In Aftermath, Arnold Schwarzenegger headlined an adaptation of this real-life tragedy. Names and locations were changed, but Schwarzenegger's Roman Melnick was very much based on Vitaly Kaloyev, with Roman's wife and daughter killed in a mid-air collision, before he himself hunts down and kills the air traffic controller who he deems responsible for causing this crash. Number 7, Bloodsport. If you believe Frank Dukes, 1988's Bloodsport is based 100% on his life. A martial artist and former Marine, Dukes was trained by ninja master Senzo Tanaki when he was just a teenager. Not just that, but Frank won a hush-hush martial arts tournament called the Kumite back in 1975. With Jean-Claude Van Damme in the role of US Army Captain Frank Dukes in Bloodsport, that film saw JCVD's Dukes trained similarly by a character named Senzo Tanaki when he was just a young boy. Years later, Dukes would go AWOL from his military position in order to fight in a martial arts tournament called, you guessed it, the Kumite. As you can see, so much of the real-life Frank Dukes story matches up with the cinematic Frank Dukes. The thing is, while Bloodsport is based on the real Dukes, there are major questions about just how true the claims of Frank are. Countless people have disputed that Dukes won the 75 fighting tournament that he claimed, and some have even questioned whether the Kumite tournament ever even really existed. So who knows what to believe at this stage. Number 6, Taxi Driver. Few actors have ever had a run to rival Robert De Niro's stunning output of the 1970s. From Mean Streets to Raging Bull, De Niro cemented himself as a true great of the business. With that being said, many are well aware that Raging Bull was based on the life of Jake LaMotta, but most people have zero idea that 1976's Taxi Driver also had its roots in reality. Travis Bickle was a purely fictional character, but Taxi Driver took inspiration from Arthur Bremer. Bremer's similarities with De Niro's Bickle involve his obsessive nature, his stalking habits, an interest in adult movies, and his willingness to unload a firearm. In reality, Bremer shot and paralyzed US Democratic presidential candidate George Wallace in 1972. As detailed in his diary, he had studied and followed both Wallace and Richard Nixon all across the United States. In his mission, Bremer became more and more unhinged as he began to loosen the shackles that had previously prevented him from carrying out atrocities. When looking at Taxi Driver, that mirrors Travis Bickle's unraveling sanity as the movie progresses to its brutal final act. Number 5. Dog Day Afternoon. The story of Sidney Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon is nearly beat for beat the story of John Wadowitz, Sal Natariel, Robert Westenberg, and Elizabeth Eden. Back in 1972, Wadowitz, Natariel, and Westenberg attempted to rob a Chase Manhattan bank for what they believed would be a $200,000 score. Upon realizing that the majority of the money had been removed by armored truck earlier that day though, instead the trio stole $29,000 when they arrived at the Gravesend Brooklyn Bank. The police were soon on the scene. Trapped in the bank, Wadowitz and Natariel took hostages and began to bargain with the law, demanding transportation to JFK International Airport, burgers and Coca-Cola, and the hospital release of Elizabeth Eden, who at that point was still known as Ernie Aaron. This would all come to an end 14 hours later. Natariel would end up dead, Wadowitz was arrested, and the reasoning given for the heist was to pay for sexual reassignment surgery for Eden. In 1975's Dog Day Afternoon, the story largely stayed the same, just some of the names were changed. Oh, and the demand for burgers was replaced by a demand for pizza. I can kind of see where they're coming from with that, though, to be honest. Number 4, Stuck. From Reanimator director Stuart Gordon, 2007's Stuck took a real-life tragedy and spun it into a chilling thriller. In that picture, Mina Savari's Brandy celebrates a possible promotion at work by getting wasted on booze and MDMA. On the other side of the fence, we see Stephen Rea's Tom evicted from his apartment and have his unemployment benefits stopped. As Brandy idiotically opts to drive home after her night of partying, her car hits Tom and he becomes lodged in her windscreen. Scared of being arrested rather than report this incident, Brandy drives home with the poor fella wedged in a windscreen. Once home, Savari's character, thinking of her career prospects, opts to simply leave Tom to die a slow death rather than assist him. Eventually, Tom manages to free himself with a battle to the death ensuing between he, Brandy, and Brandy's boyfriend Rashid. The majority of Gordon's 2007 picture is scarily based on the death of Gregory Glenn Briggs. 37-year-old Briggs was living on the streets when he was hit by the car of a 25-year-old by the name of Shante Jawan Mallard, who was under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, and ecstasy. Mallard would drive home with Briggs trapped in her windscreen, leave Briggs and the car in her garage while she went and had sex with a partner, then came out to check on the man before leaving him to die. After laughing about this tragedy, 4 months later, Mallard was arrested and sentenced to 50 years in prison. And rightly so. Number 3, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Not just one, but 2 Wes Craven pictures find their way onto this list. For A Nightmare on Elm Street's core premise was based on a real person. It wasn't knife-fingered, burnt-skinned child killer Freddy Krueger who was based directly on a real figure, but more it was the victims of that first Elm Street for which Craven pulled inspiration from the real world. As Wes detailed in an interview with Vulture back in 2014, his original idea for A Nightmare on Elm Street came after he read a story in the LA Times about a young boy who was troubled by nightmares. This poor youngster had frantically told his parents that he didn't want to sleep, for if he did, then the figure chasing him would kill him. After staying awake for several days, the boy eventually fell asleep. While his parents were originally relieved at this, they were awoken in the middle of the night by a terrified scream. They soon found that he died in the middle of his nightmare. Pulling on this, Wes Craven then made this the basis of the terror that Heather Langenkamp's Nancy and her friends were faced with in 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street and Beyond. All that Craven did then was give this nightmare presence a face and a terrifying name. Number 2. Notting Hill. The actual inspiration for this entire video came from a recent report that Richard Curtis's Notting Hill was based on an on-and-off romantic relationship of Uma Thurman's back in the 1990s. For years, Notting Hill star Hugh Grant has claimed that Curtis told him that the movie was inspired by a secret relationship of an extremely famous woman, although Grant would never reveal just who said woman was. Recently, the Daily Mail reported that the famous woman in question was none other than Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, and Dangerous Liaison's favourite, Uma Thurman. If true, Notting Hill was partly inspired by a chance meeting Thurman had with a stranger in Harrods back in 1994. That stranger was William Seagate, a friend of Richard Curtis's. After that first meeting, Seagate and Thurman would privately meet up whenever the actress found herself in London. Well, until Uma met and later married Ethan Hawke, that is. Of course, in Notting Hill, Julia Roberts' Anna Scott is the big-name actress who strikes up an unlikely romance with Hugh Grant's Will Thacker. And you can't blame her. Number 1. 50 First Dates. One of the more unbelievable based on real-life movies to be featured here is Peter Segal's 50 First Dates. After the so-so anger management, Adam Sandler bounced back in a major way with this heartwarming 2004 effort. And to do that, he re-teamed with his Wedding Singer co-star Drew Barrymore. It's Barrymore's character of Lucy Whitmore who has her roots in real life here. In 50 First Dates, Lucy had a car accident that causes her to wake up afresh every day, believing it to be the day of said accident and unable to retain new memories. Surprisingly, Lucy was partially based on a woman called Michelle Philpotts. From Spalding, Lincolnshire, England, Michelle lost the ability to form new memories in 1994 after being involved in multiple vehicle accidents. The diagnosis from doctors was that Michelle has anterograde amnesia, and she manages each and every day by using a post-it note system that prompts her of what she needs to know. Interestingly, Michelle didn't marry her now husband Ian until 3 years after 94, meaning every day he has to win her over, much like Sandler's Henry Roth had to in 50 First Dates. Imagine that. And that's our list. Know of any other movies people didn't know were based on real-life people? Let us know all about them in the comments section right down below, and do not forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button. Also, be sure to head on over to Whatculture.com and find some more incredible articles just like the one this video is based on. I've been Gareth from Whatculture.com. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm sure I'll see you very, very soon.